Tens of thousands of patients are now dying from infections that used to be easily treated. Antibiotics simply aren't working anymore. We need new, better ones, but drug companies typically don't develop them because Big Pharma tends to lose money on antibiotics. Infectious disease Dr. Matt McCarthy serves on the front line of this crisis at New York Presbyterian Hospital. In his new book, Superbugs, he offers a glimmer of hope, a new way to both cure and prevent future superbug infections with a single treatment. Dr. McCarthy himself tested this rare new antibiotic on some of his sickest patients with impressive results.
Well, his book is called Superbugs, The Race to Stop the Epidemic, and Dr. Matt McCarthy is with us. Doctor, it's good to see you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Tell me, what's the difference between a virus and a bacteria? What are we dealing with in both of those?
Yeah, I'm an infectious disease doctor, and so I have to think about viruses, bacteria, parasites, all kinds of different pathogens that are attacking my patients. Viruses are a bit more simplistic. They often are just a strand of DNA or RNA. Bacteria are a little more sophisticated, and as I've seen during my career, they're becoming even more sophisticated, and they're figuring out ways to evade the best drugs that we can throw at them, including all of these powerful antibiotics that once worked so well and no longer do.
Doctors, I remember with little children, a pediatrician, kid gets a sore throat, he's hit with antibiotics. We give antibiotics to animals. Do we feed chickens antibiotics? Have the bugs said we're going to adapt to all that?
This is the fundamental problem, is that we have misused antibiotics for 2 generations.
Yeah.
And the bacteria have figured out ways to evade the drugs that we treat them with. And that has led to this subtle shift that I've seen in my career practicing medicine, that the pills that I used to give patients were no longer working, and I had to use intravenous antibiotics. And over the past 5 years, I've started to see that these intravenous treatments aren't working either. And that has led us to this breaking point where we can now say that superbugs are an epidemic, and it's on the verge of being a pandemic. And the expectation is that by 2050, superbugs are going to kill 10 million people every single year.
Come on, 10 million?
Those are the projections.
Is anybody in the government sounding an alarm? That is a frightening statistic.
Well, this is one of the most interesting things about it. It is one of the most important political issues that no one is talking about. Antibiotics are, by definition, a market failure, that the market does not support the production of them. And the reason is that pharmaceutical companies aren't making enough money off of them. And there are people saying that the government has to intervene. And I wrote this book because I want people to understand, if the government intervenes, what is a good proposal and what's a bad proposal. Because a year from now, we're going to be hearing a lot of different suggestions, and some of them are going to be good and some not so good.
You started the book about Fleming and penicillin. And it was a wartime thing that people were getting tetanus and they didn't know why. Can you amplify that?
Yeah, I started with Fleming because it was truly a miracle, the way he discovered penicillin. And he was, before the discovery of antibiotics, he was a wartime doctor taking care of wounded soldiers. And he was looking at these patients who were getting shot and they had these infected wounds, and he could do nothing to stop the wound from the infection from spreading. And he went back to his laboratory and he said, there's got to be a better way. And he started looking for ways to develop better treatments. And one day, it was literally a miracle. He stumbled upon a molecule that could destroy bacteria and has now saved 200 million lives.
Penicillin.
That's right. And the scary part is that the penicillin isn't working as well anymore. And that's because we took the drug that he discovered and we ran with it. And we used it so much that the bacteria figured out ways to evade it and to get around it. And so now we need new drugs.
How in the world can we stop chicken farmers and beef producers from shooting these things into their animals?
So that's another important point, is it's not just overprescribing these for humans, but there was an article in the paper this weekend saying that we're overusing them in orange groves.
Orange?
Yep, to keep the oranges healthy. And so we have to balance what we need for agriculture and for farming with keeping patients safe. And so, again, it's going to be one of the most important issues that no one is yet really talking about.
You know, we've done a series on the gut flora, the intestinal biome, and we have discovered that antibiotics will kill every one of these friendly bacteria in our guts and leave us open to a whole host of illnesses. Is that something that you've been
You're absolutely right. And what you're talking about, the microbiome, is one of the most interesting areas of medical research right now. And every antibiotic that we give that has a life-saving property also has a potential side effect. And one of the side effects is wiping out all of those good bacteria that you're speaking of. And so we have to figure out ways to both treat patients but protect those good bacteria inside of each and every one of us.
Well, your book is a epic of torment to try to get a different treatment. You just didn't want to come up with a drug. You came up with a whole host of, well, you're going into the DNA of the bug to try to kill it from inside. What was your technique?
Well, what I wanted people to understand was how we got into this mess of superbugs and how we get out of it. And the way to do that was not to take a 30,000-foot view, but to really get into the hospital, get into the patient's rooms and introduce people to the patients suffering from these infections, but then also to look at the scientists who are trying to come up with the next miracle, and also taking a look at the pharmaceutical companies, many of whom are saying it no longer makes sense for us to make new drugs. We lose money on these things. And in fact, one CEO, I quote, said that he has an ethical mandate to charge as much money as possible for every drug that he makes, because he's accountable to shareholders, not to patients.
Ethical mandate to look after his shareholders?
That's the crisis that we now face, and that's one of the reasons that we are looking at millions of people dying from superbugs.
Well, what is your technique?
Well, one of the things I wanted to answer was a question that a patient posed to me 5 years ago, which is, why is it so hard to make a new antibiotic? So I went to the companies who make these drugs, and I said, how can we make a difference in people's lives? What can we do? And my technique was to find drugs that I thought would actually work and to test them and to talk with patients. And I'm on the ethics committee at my hospital. And I think a lot about what it's like to experiment on people. And these patients are dying and they're infected and they may be scared. How do you conduct a trial responsibly where you are saving lives, but you're also doing it in a responsible way? And that was my technique, was to always balance the cutting edge science with the moral clarity of somebody doing good research.
Well, what exactly do you do? I mean, you have a technique of getting to the
we looked at a drug that you give one time and can get rid of an infection with a single dose. The challenge is that one dose costs thousands of dollars. And we have to figure out, how do we not break a pharmacy's budget by doing this? How do we talk to patients who've just come into the hospital who are infected, and we say, we can give you one dose and you can go home. And they may say to me, go home? I just came into the emergency room because I'm sick. And we tried to figure out ways to balance a lot of competing interests, because we're trying to take care of patients, but we also want to get them out of the hospital because we don't want them to be exposed to any other pathogens. So it was a very high wire act, so to speak, just because there were so many different things going on. But it made for a great story to tell people, to explain just how complicated this is, and moving forward, how we address this, how we tackle this problem.
You know, that Staphylococcus aureus is it's called hospital staph, and people get that. I think New York Presbyterian was where my second son was born, and he contracted something which he committed to his mother, which came to me, which was everywhere, because it's very pervasive, isn't it?
Well, it's everywhere. And my father-in-law had a staph infection.
Yeah.
And when he needed to be cured, I sent him to my hospital because we have the experts to treat him.
Yeah.
And it's becoming more and more common. When I was in medical school, we talked about MRSA as being something that was in gymnasiums or in nursing homes. Now it's everywhere. It's on our x-ray machines, it's on white coats, it's in doctors and nurses' nostrils. It's places you would never even expect it. And what I wanted to do was to educate people, to say, here is an issue that you're going to be hearing more and more about. You may not have thought about it, but it's going to become the medical issue of the next 10 years and beyond.
But hospitals, where people go to the hospitals to get well, this is the place they go to get sick.
Well, one of the ironic things here is that some of the best hospitals in the world may have more superbugs because they have the experts who know how to treat them. They have the most sophisticated diagnostic techniques. They have all of these remarkable things that we can do to detect superbugs and then to cure them.
What do we do? I mean, you give us a problem that should scare the daylights out of everybody watching this program. What should we do to defend ourselves?
Well, you know, I don't want this to be something that people are strictly fearful about.
Yeah.
I want people to be optimistic as well. You know, when I walk into the hospital every day to treat patients, I know that I'm going to be seeing a dozen patients with superbug infections, and I'm confident that we're going to cure all of them. But it's not easy. And so I want people to understand what we're doing to protect patients, to protect ourselves, and to stop the promotion of these drug-resistant microbes. Because by using our antibiotics responsibly, we protect the next generation. And by investing in the new drugs and picking the right ones, the selective investment, that's going to be crucial to attacking this problem.
Well, you know, I remember reading about the fact in Russia, in those prisons, that they give a little bit of antibiotics to people with tuberculosis, and all that does is create a whole host of antibiotic-resistant TB, which is something that we thought we'd taken care of.
You hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
Inappropriately prescribing antibiotics is one of the leading causes of superbugs. If your doctor prescribes 10 days of an antibiotic and you only take 2 of the days, that's going to allow the bacteria to change in ways that they can then become impervious. So we have to make sure that we don't just give antibiotics out whenever we think to do it. And to give somebody with tuberculosis a partial course of treatment is a major mistake.
Well, it spread the disease. I mean, so it's terrible. These people get on an airplane and the next...
It's terrible.
Yeah.
And especially the airborne diseases. You know, somebody coughs in your direction and suddenly you're vulnerable. So it's a big issue.
One last question. Somebody comes to you, he's got MRSA. How do you treat it?
Well, it depends. Depending on how big the infection is, how sick the patient is, sometimes we try an oral antibiotic, sometimes we do intravenous, or sometimes we try this new drug, which I write about in my book, where we give a single dose and it stays in your system for weeks, and you don't even need to be hospitalized. And that was this extraordinary property of this new drug that I wanted to write about and use as an example of here are the innovative ways that we're confronting superbugs.
Well, the insurance companies pay for that, by the way.
Well, that's a different story. That part we're working on.
Okay. But anyhow, you've got the answer, though.
Yeah, I think we do. We've made a lot of strides, and we're fundamentally changing the way that we treat this disease.
Well, I appreciate it. And listen, this book, folks, is called Superbug. It'll available wherever books are sold. And Dr. McCarthy is going to I'm so glad he's joining us. But you need to be aware of what's going on, and maybe it might save your life. Doctor, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
God bless you.